G20 is over, but the debate is still raging. Should the industrialized world be pumping more stimulus into the global economy or tightening its belt before the bond markets put it on a crash diet? With us this morning to help answer the crucial question is John Lipsky, First Deputy Managing Director at the International Monetary Fund. He's in Washington. And John, let's start right there. Is Europe doing the right thing by prioritizing deficit reduction?
Well, remember, the deficit reduction plans that are being discussed now are for 2011. For this year in balance, fiscal policy in the major economies, including Germany, remain expansionary, and that's appropriate. And as you saw in the Toronto summit, the leaders endorsed flexibility in case of future difficulties.
At the same time, though, John, we know that these leaders pledged to cut their budget deficits in half by 2013. Is the world economy strong enough now, or is it going to be strong enough a year or two hence to absorb the kind of fiscal austerity that is clearly on the horizon?
Well, as we point out in our Fiscal Monitor publication, taking the G20 advanced economies on average, they're planning a reduction in deficits on a cyclically adjusted basis of about 1.25% of GDP next year. That looks appropriate. We think in the following years about 1% per year would be appropriate. Now, in the near term, we've also counseled flexibility, and it looks like current plans are broadly appropriate.
How about the level of uncertainty over government policy out there? How do we address it and the impact that it is having and could continue to have on the markets, on consumers, and on companies?
Well, that was certainly one of the important focuses of the G20 Leaders Summit last weekend in Toronto. And you may notice in their leaders' statement, they are pledged to a continuation of what they call the framework for strong, sustainable, and balanced growth through a mutual assessment process that they have pledged will produce an innovative and unique comprehensive action plan to be unveiled in the Seoul summit. In other words, the countries are not just going to plan on their own, but they are going to develop a set of policies that are coherent and consistent and will be supportive of global recovery.
John, I think we need to turn our attention to stress tests because there's been some news out of Europe on that this morning. In your opinion, how tough do the stress tests have to be to earn the market's confidence back?
Well, tough enough and realistic enough. I think the important thing is to show where if there are any capital deficiencies, potential capital deficiencies in any institution, to give comfort about not only the current level of capital but the availability of backstopping to make sure that investors and others understand that the European banking system will remain stable and has the backing and backup to make sure that that'll be the case. John,
do these stress tests need to be made public for every single bank in every single country? Otherwise, you're not really getting enough disclosure to inspire that confidence?
Well, we have counseled transparency, and the European authorities, as you probably saw last week, have undertaken that they will publish the results on an institution-by-institution basis. So the level of transparency will be broadly equivalent to what we saw here in the U.S. last year, and that seemed to be quite effective in clarifying and addressing investors' uncertainties.
John, do you agree that there's no point doing the stress tests unless you include sovereign default scenarios? And if so, how do you decide what kind of haircut to take on these bonds?
Oh, these are technical questions. Of course, when you say default scenario, that sounds like a doomsday scenario. What you need is a kind of a realistic assessment of the potential pressures that are facing European and other financial institutions, in this case European institutions. Obviously, in some way, we'll have to reflect either current market prices for sovereign debt or in some way reflect potential stresses. But I'm sure the authorities that are actually implementing the stress tests will provide realistic scenarios.
John, with about 30 seconds to go, you said realistically, which countries should be included in those scenarios?
Oh, we're not going to go. We're not going to go into those kind of details. And in fact, the important thing is that the commitment to provide transparency, to provide the information that investors will need to form their own judgments. But importantly is also the commitment by European authorities to ensure that there's backstopping for the system.
John,
I think this is going to turn out to be a good.
John, thank you. John Lipsky.